you guys go back into your work, and then we can sit down one by one and go back and see where you're at. So I'm just showing you a project, a past student, a Pratt student, basically, where he's making a connection between the library, a monastery, and the Pantheon. He embodies it, basically houses his projects in the Pantheon, and he decided to make an intervention, which means an actual, like an effect, inserting himself into an existing structure. So the evolution of a program, the generation of a notion of a library, is expressed here in the context of 3 contiguous projects created over the course of 2 years. The Library of Evolutionary Knowledge attempts to deal formally with 2 operations, referencing and cataloging. It is programmatically the only library. The monastery and Pantheon explore the 2 notions separately. 3 projects aim to reinvent the notion of a library in an electronic age that has challenged the traditional use of information. So, in the Library of Evolutionary Knowledge, the understanding of storage and process came into form labeled the categorical and the referential. The 2 operations explored the basic functions of a library. It is the resurrection of a library. The monastery is also a library, but its epistemology is based on reference, in this case, to light. Light is the constant measure for speed, perception, and position. All measurements are a function of this value. With this single reference, simulation becomes the manipulator of what is real in the building. It is a library of reference. You guys get that? Do you guys know what reference is? Is anyone just asleep right now?
Well, we know what it is.
So what's reference?
It's to something that like when you refer to something,
right,
you look back to it, you get a better understanding of what you're referring to.
So anything you're referring to is a reference. Mm-hmm. So remember, like way back when we first started the class, Foundations, we talked about understanding space. The only way you can understand space is by understanding your position in relation to something else's position. The only way you can understand that you exist, if there were no mirrors here, for example, let's say mirrors were never invented, how would you even know you exist?
We'll talk about the philosophy instead of I think, therefore I am.
I mean, that's great. So Borges, the author, and I brought his book actually, he made an interesting statement, and I can go into him a little bit in more detail, but he believed that mirrors were basically abominable because they multiplied men, just like basically having children, that a mirror multiplies us. So he's saying that they're dangerous because they multiply us. So you think of it as an idea, right? And the idea, the story is, same thing with this guy, with Sartre. Basically his whole concept of hell was 3 people in a room, no mirrors, and you can never understand you exist without someone else's perception of you. You see? And the things that you're traditionally used to doing, like put on makeup or shaving or something like that, you cannot do. Because now you're at the mercy of someone else telling you how to do it. You see? So his version of hell is 3 people are stuck in a room, they can't get out, the lights are always on, there are no mirrors. That's it. And so at first you're like, okay, it doesn't sound bad, but wait, what happens just from that? Because it means you're stuck. And basically what his idea was, this is what life is. This is us on planet Earth, is hell. Because we're trapped with the others. You can't leave. You need them to give you a clue of who you are. That's what his concept was of existentialism. It's called existentialism. So the reference is something. So the reference it basically is something that we're using to refer to, right? To understand a position. So it could be a reference for space, it could be a reference for anything. So when you go into a library, at least the old libraries, because I'm not sure now, that's kind of still, that's a little bit outdated, but still the reference is very valid and it's very important. Even in a digital library, there's going to be references. So that was the idea of cataloging. You need references. In order to find that book, you can't just go find that book. You have to find what category, where it's been cataloged, where it's been grouped, into what groups, and so on. So So he's saying in the with a single reference, simulation becomes the manipulator of what is real in a building. It is a library of reference. He's talking about the monastery. And then he says the pantheon is, in its contemporary context, a fragment, buried beneath Rome or the foundations that fill its taxonomy. This program is an act of excavation, identifying and cataloging fragments, thereby inheriting them. In any notion of unity exists subvertly the fragment, yet it is not debris. It is particular and complete. The fragment inherits a permanent fossil chronology. It has no responsibilities and is free of invention and implication. It is the severed limb, torso, or head, gruesome and violent yet seductive. Within this sinister relic is the ability to determine beyond its own physicality. It is a library of tactility and unforeseen connections. So he made this kind of relationship. It's all about the idea of relationship of one thing to another thing. So anytime we're saying, like, what are we after? What are you doing with your work? What you're doing is trying to make what you would call to transmute. Trans means like transfer. The word trans, that prefix, means to cross over, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
The word like transfer,
Mm-hmm.
transatlantic means crossing the Atlantic. Anything using transitory means moving across. Transition, anything with the trans means to cross. So when you're saying transmute, it means that you're doing from moving from one thing to another thing. And that can be using a verb or a word and transmuting, or a picture, an image, an idea, and it has to be transmute into form. You see? It's not just like you guys are reaching out there looking for something cool to make. It's basically like you're structuring on knowledge. If you have something you know, then there's something that you can say. If there's no knowing, there's nothing that can be done. Without the idea that you know something, that you have something to say, there's no way that you're going to be able to show it in form or anything else. You see? That's why I said what Cynthia did on Monday by bringing in a story first. So she brought in a story first, which is, what I had waited and I wanted to see if anyone would do that. Said, find a thinker, dedicated to the pavilion to a thinker, and then create a narrative, create a story. So how did you start? I want you to just describe this.
Well, first, I had no direction what I was doing, so then I was like, no, I'll start with one of these people over here. So I looked up, I did...
The guard.
Yeah, but I started like looking at other ones, and then I found these. I know it's library, so I just went to that and did research on it, and I realized that I really liked this whole idea of the optimist and pessimist. So I continued with that.
Why? Why did you like it?
Because it was like two opposites, and there's like a conflict, I guess you can say, between them, and it created a type of story, and there's like an argument along with it, like somebody's arguing that the pessimist is better or the optimist is better, and this is why. But then I realized that within those two people, like you could say that you're a pessimist, but along with pessimism, there's always like optimism with it, but you don't realize it until like something within like in your life hits you, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm not as pessimist as I seem to be, and then you can say the same thing with the optimist. So I was like, okay, I could do something trying to show this happening.
When you did that, what happened next? How did you get to the garden idea, the idea of the garden, the idea of two spaces or something like that?
Because I saw the optimist and pessimist as two different people at first, and then the garden with the reflected pools was the thing that connected them. It was like the garden of life.
So basically, and I guess for a simple term for me, that's a type of transmuting, a transmutation, that you're carrying an idea across to an image. So in your mind, you see two things, two separate things. It sounds simple, like, okay, they're two separate characters. But the fact that they're two separate characters, now that has to become architecture, that has to become a space. That's two separate things. So that's a start. But that's basically the impetus. It's kind of like the engine that starts off triggers that gets your mind thinking, that starts making you imagine. Without those triggers, without that kind of motion, there's no way you can get anywhere. It's like a standard thing. It's kind of like a known thing. Maybe you guys don't know that, but it's something that you'll find through struggle. You'll do it once, you'll do it twice, you'll do it 3 times. Maybe after 20 times, maybe you'll come up with something great or something interesting by chance, right? Just randomly. But you'll never be able to repeat it because you won't be aware of what you did to get there. So what I'm basically saying is, start to understand, how did I get there? So she started with an idea, and like she said, she was completely lost, and I saw it too. And actually, as soon as she said it, I chose Descartes. And why did you choose Descartes? Because of these 2 characters, and those 2 characters represent the space, and the spaces of 2 different spaces. It's like clear, right? Now, how exciting you make it is up to you. It's all about the limit of your imagination. How you take those 2 things, and then you start reading into the story, create the story. So if I said then that the anatomy of a text. So think about this. So we have anatomy, right? Anatomy of the body, anatomy of anything. There's an anatomy of anything, which means that you're taking it apart and you're breaking it down into its components, right? Anything that exists out there has an anatomy. You just have to either know that there is one or not. Either you're aware of the fact that there's anatomy or you're not. If you're not unaware, then you're kind of lost. If you're aware there's an anatomy, then you have to basically reveal it. So language comes through experiencing, as if reading, a higher value of knowledge. So a type of evolution. So any building that you move through is like reading yourself through it, making a building do something for you. So basically, the intellectual power, basically architecture is a book that you're reading. It is a story that you're reading. It is text. It's not just a random thing that I found. That's not what it is, because you created it. So whether you knew it or not, there's knowledge in there. If there's a real knowledge in there, then it's exciting. If the knowledge is mumbled or jumbled or not certain,
right,
then your work will be uncertain. You see? There has to be a true reading, just like a statement. So what is your statement? If you have no statement, then your work is basically hanging on threads, hoping that it, has some measure of harmony and all these other things, all these dynamic ideas. The other thing is, since we're transmuting from one thing to another thing, meaning whether you like it or not, this idea that she's saying, pessimist and optimist, becomes an idea only.
Yeah.
It can die there. So now her challenge is, can she make it into an object? Can that become an object that I can move through and I can sense that? And she did it skillfully, that it created kind of like an inspiration in me, because I believe basically that great architecture can affect us. Just its presence, just you moving through it, you see, can improve you, can affect you, can empower you. If it's not powerful, then it won't empower you. If there's nothing to it, you'll forget it as soon as you walk out. It becomes kind of a secondary and almost invisible. So the idea here is finding that statement, finding that sentence, finding that narrative, and then the idea of taking that and transmuting it to something else, taking that idea and transmuting it. It's basically a transitory space. You need a verb to carry you there. You need verbs. And verbs will force whatever you're working to start to display motion. You see? So the only way you can create motion in your work is to use actions, to use verbs, to look for verbs. So it's almost like you need to start creating your own words, right? So if she needed something that's going to relate between this optimist and pessimist, what is it? And first she has to do some research and find out who is the optimist, who is the pessimist, and what are they about? Why do we care? Right? So if you're here thinking that this is a recipe, that basically you're just going to go into Rhino and Rhino's going to do it for you, then you made a mistake and you should leave right now. If you thought that this was basically just spit some things in this machine and it'll look cool, you're wrong. It's like, you're dead wrong. If you're looking to invent something, because you said you want to invent something new, the only way to do that is through this idea of transmutation. It means that you have to come up with an original statement, something that no one has said before, or make a connection that maybe no one has made yet. If you can't, try to follow the ones who've come up with those. Try to follow the ones who've done that before, and learn from them. I brought Scarpa as one example. He's a great one, and someone that you guys all should know, because he influenced probably all the architects of right now, including some of the others, like Franklin Wright and so on. But this was a man of integrity who sat there, and he was lucky. He was fortunate. He had a client who adored him and who supported him for 20 years. So this guy, he had fun in his life. He basically sat and he did one client supported him for 20 years, told him, keep going, I love your work. And we are fortunate. So in the end, do your few great things, work on projects only that will give you great design opportunities, because that's where immortality rests. So this is a corner, for example. This is a corner. Wall, ceiling. Right? That's from the outside, that's from the inside. That's simple, right? Simple. But the way it's been done, it's pretty incredible, right? Even just how the glass, and how the wall, and how the ceilings basically float and create this kind of effect. So the corner's missing. Just a simple thing like that.
Was the top open?
It has glass. Even like details like a staircase. Let me see if I can find it. Everything, including a staircase. So this is the side of a staircase, and this is the elevation. So you're looking at that staircase.
Yeah.
So the staircase becomes a landing, a shelf to display something. It becomes many different things all as one. A place where you can sit, a place where you can walk, a place that can frame something. Storage. It becomes all one. So again, it like goes back to the story and the idea of how you detail, the idea of how each element connects to the other is all like one language. It's one mode of thinking. My question to you is this: when you're writing a story, if an author or someone who's writing a novel is writing his story there, does he accept someone from behind, a client or whoever, come up to him and say, take out these 3 words here, I think they should be this?
No, it's creation. So
it's his creation.
Yes,
it's his mode.
Yeah.
No author is going to sit there and allow someone to come up behind him and say no. So why should it be different for you as an architect? You see, and this is why my statement here is strong and it's very different than what you may hear others say. It's literally saying the client, she has no business doing our work for us.
It's just like the movie, The Fountainhead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. The client has no business. The client should just, we don't build. We don't build to have clients. We have clients to build. That was his clear statement. You have clients to build. And I know that sounds arrogant, but the fact is, you go to school, you study, do all this research, you carry all this knowledge of the human element out there in the world. Someone has given you this freedom to do this. So now, what do you do with it? You don't go to the doctor and tell him how to do his job, do you?
No.
And if the doctor doesn't make you well, you don't say, okay, I don't pay you. You see, I think our whole structure of the profession in architecture has been kind of like, misled to thinking this is client-driven, that we need to be doing what the client wants. That this is all about the program and the client. This has nothing to do. Imagination is not in the world of the client. Imagination is in your head. And in the way you take the outside world and you bring it in and you spit something else and you come up with something new. Can you look at something out there And can it trigger for you a project internally? You have something to say? That's basically what this is about. You are the transmuter, if you want to call it. What am I? I'm a transmuter because I take something from out there, even a cloud, and a cloud now is going to become my project. I don't actually try to make a cloud. I try to abstract an idea of what the cloud gives me, and I come up with a new idea. You see? That's innovation, that's inventiveness. The only way to invent is to basically cross that bridge. It's a very difficult bridge to cross, especially when you're struggling to find where am I, who am I, what am I doing here? And basically that can only start with this idea that you know. If you don't know, you see what I'm saying? In terms of knowing, you have to know. Do you know anything? You know, do you know anything? Do you know anything in general? First of all, do you know that you know? The idea is that you have to be aware that knower inside you tells you, no, you know, you're not going to go this way or that way. You have to do this. You see, the one who, if you don't know anything, then you're in trouble. If you're just sitting around waiting for someone else to tell you what to do, then you're kind of like floating. So what you need to first be is moral and wise, which means that you're taking information in and you're trying to use it. You're not just sitting there randomly, just trying to do anything. Let's look up some architectural record books and see what this guy did. Maybe I can just copy what he did. So that's not yours. So how do you do something of yours? It means that you have to come up with an experience that that's personal to you from something that's been triggered from the outside. So you just look at nature and it'll give you millions of ideas. So living in the abstract idea, starting with this story, like Cynthia was talking about, is like the highest level, because it basically means that you have a text, you have a statement. And now the challenge for you as a great artist, if you had the ability and the talent and all this other stuff, would be, okay, do it. You see, translate that text now into form. You know, who's the optimist? Is it a low? Like, how do you relate to it? And you make a little list almost. The optimist, dark, deep, thin, small frame of tunnel vision, whatever. Is the optimist then is the pessimist then a tunnel? And the optimist is open, supportive. So what is that? A staircase going up? Things like that. And once you decide, okay, there's a wall between the optimist and pessimist, but hey, you know what? Sometimes the optimist has a little bit of the pessimist in order to be the optimist.
Right.
In order to be the good optimist, he needs to have the pessimist pestering, right? So it's the duality again. So if I sat down and tried to write a story, maybe it would take me an entire day. I could probably write a story, a novel on just what that is, the pessimist and the optimist. And again, looking at Victor Borges, who's a great example. So this guy is saying, although his work has been restricted to the short story, the essay, and poetry, Jorge Luis Borges of Argentina is recognized all over the world as one of the most original and significant figures in modern literature. In his preface, Andre Maurois writes, Borges is a great writer who has composed only little essays or short narratives, yet they suffice for us to call him great because of their wonderful intelligence, their wealth of invention, and their tight, almost mathematical style. So this book was Labyrinths. It's basically short stories, I think like 30 of them, of every kind of labyrinth you can think of. Nothing that you can even, like I can't dream. You dream them up. So you think labyrinth, Minotaur. You think of like an endless maze. And then he'll write a story that'll blow you away. And then at the end of the book, that's a labyrinth. Even if it's like some detective, like short story, a detective is trying to find a killer. There's a labyrinth going on. It's like, is he going to find a serial killer or something like that? Or a writer who's trying to finish his book and he's about to be shot by a firing squad. So a different type of labyrinth. So, coming up with a story. The idea is that sometimes you have to create your own words, your own vocabulary, your own terms. What are your terms? So you start with the pessimist and optimist. What do you need to help them, or to help you gain that idea and make it into something real. You see, and then finding the components that do that. Is there a bridge between the optimist and pessimist? Is there a wall, an obstacle? In order to become the pessimist, in order to become the optimist, you have to basically break obstacles. In order to be, if you don't break the obstacles, you revert back to being the pessimist. There's a ramp that drops you down into being the pessimist. It's like a whole crazy load of stories that can tie you into that. It's all about, like, is your work something you can read? You walk through it and you read. You read the text. Not literally words, but an experience. You see? So in ancient times, basically, architecture was the book, because a regular book like this can be burned. You can burn it, and the author, and you'd never even know that it existed. So their understanding was, make it in stone, and it'll survive, and it'll continue to emit that story, that text. You see? So with all of you, you'll have to, first of all, write something for these projects.
Yeah.
It needs to be dedicated to someone. It needs to have a story. It can't just be an exercise. It can't just be an exercise of geometry. See, geometry is great, and it's actually the number one. If you talked about it for me, it's probably the top. Without that, you're nowhere, because even the letters are driven by the geometry. But after you gain the letters and you're talking about a language, then what are you saying? You need language. So without the intellect, without the text, then you're basically half. You're only half done. Okay? So I wanted you guys to just look at some of this work and look at this guy's drawings. This is from the Brion Cemetery. This is a cemetery.